All right. Well, so that was the GTNP was a great place to start because I think with permafrost, that's one of the most successful US communities to have an international vision. I want to start with this slide just to remind all of us that although the work of IARPC is inherently US based, to meet the performance elements, especially those related to, well, related to just about everything, vegetation, carbon cycling, and permafrost, we have to go beyond the US borders because less than 10% of the permafrost region exists in the United States. So the purpose of IARPC is beginning to understand really to be the mouthpiece, or the purpose of IASC is to be the mouthpiece for IARPC. And we're supposed to pass information from IARPC and US agencies to IASC and then bring information back. So, and that's the purpose of what I'm doing today. I just wanted to touch on what IASC does. The first thing is really the promotion of these international Arctic science collaborative efforts. And this includes a lot of focus on supporting science development and logistics, particularly access to more difficult places, the Arctic Ocean, places in Russia. They provide independent science advice, particularly to the Arctic Council. There's a push towards ensuring data safeguarding, exchange, and access, particularly long-term, for long-term data sets. There's interest in coordinating international access to all areas of the Arctic and ensuring freedom and ethical conduct of science in the Arctic. And then there's been a big push to promote the next generation of Arctic scientists and to interact with other polar groups, including Antarctic groups. Okay, so the current leadership of the group that I'm part of, which is the Terrestrial Working Group, consists of a diverse array of different types of scientists. So the Terrestrial Working Group includes the chair, Phil Wookey. He's an ecosystem ecologist like me. But then there's Vladimir, representing permafrost geophysics. The vice chair, Joseph Elster, he is a microbial ecologist in cold regions. And then finally, the past chair, Inga Svala Johnsdotter, she is a plant ecologist working at very fine scales on plant-animal interactions. So that gives you a taste of the types of topics that are covered by the Terrestrial Working Group. So the focus really is terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems. It's the one group that looks at diversity issues, both going forward and going into the past. The group is very interested in ecological connectivity and cross-scale phenomena. And, well, I'm a little out of order here in these slides, but it includes, of course, the ecosphere, the cryosphere, and the geosphere. There's been a lot of interest in species interactions and trophic dynamics, and particularly the emergence of new pests and pathogens in warming regions. And historically, the domain of the working group has been limited to latitudinal tree line, but we know that disturbances such as wildfires and abrupt permafrost thaw, those are really important changes that are occurring, particularly south of the tree line, that are likely to move north and become more important in the future. So we're focused on changing the domain of the Terrestrial Working Group to include the major drainage basins that are forested now that influence the Arctic Ocean, as well as the rest of the forested Arctic. Okay. So we're also engaged in cross-cutting issues, and this mostly is materially represented by collaborative interactions with the other working groups. There's interest in biosphere feedbacks to climate change, in ecological impacts of the changing cryosphere, and in social ecological systems. And you can imagine the list goes on and on. Past activities of the Terrestrial Working Group, US representatives have been very active in leading these activities. Skip Walker has been leading a push for an Arctic vegetation archive and systematic pan-Arctic classification of vegetation. There's a herbivory network meeting that primarily focused on protocols for assaying the impacts of herbivory on tundra vegetation. There's a very successful circumpolar flux workshop that's part of a circumpolar flux synthesis by Sandy Starkweather, and that is looking at carbon and energy fluxes in terrestrial ecosystems. And then you just heard about the GTNP. Finally, there's the RADIC group, which is Rapid Arctic Transitions Due to Infrastructure and Climate, which is really focusing on the intersection of natural systems and built infrastructure. Okay, so that's past activities. There are a couple of new things on the table. The first is something we've been calling terrestrial mosaic, and this is an interest in sort of piggybacking on the current mosaic experiment that's going to be starting in the Arctic Ocean, and I think it's spring of 2019. But this would be extending observations of, well, of both weather, vegetation, permafrost, and carbon into these terrestrial ecosystems that influence the Arctic Ocean. And so this is just in a nascent stage. It's led by Warwick Vincent from Canada, and they're hoping to have more discussions and more US involvement in the future. There's a new terrestrial working group activity that's focused on disease ecology and connecting ecology, health, and disease for Arctic wildlife. And this is led by Thierry Boulanier from France. There's a new network for arthropods of the tundra, which spans the whole gamut of arthropod diversity to arthropod impacts. And this is led by Thomas Hoy from Denmark. And then finally, the Terrestrial Working Group has been supporting a group that's been making these frozen ground cartoons, which are available online as a teaching and outreach tool. Okay, so just to highlight upcoming activities, the T-Mosaic group is going to have their first meeting at the Arctic Change Symposium in Quebec City in December. It's when most of us are at AGU. But we will continue with that discussion at the Polar 2018 conference. I want to draw your attention to the program Interact, which is one of the past sort of poster children of the Terrestrial Working Group. And this is an EU-funded grant that provides either boots on the ground, physical or remote access for people from all over the world to Arctic field stations. And although the call is closed for submitting applications for physical access, the call is still open for remote access. So I think there are 132 different field stations where you can request that data is collected for you when your group. And so you can make an application through the Interact EU Transnational Access Program. Okay, so the Polar 2018 conference is coming up, and this is where the Terrestrial Working Group and other components of IASC have their focal meetings. But then there's also sort of a more general science session where people from all over the Arctic are giving presentations about just about any topic you can imagine. Okay, so those meetings continue in 2019 and 2020, and I think it would be, we want to position ourselves so that we can propose a US-led collaborative sessions for those summit weeks in the future. And we've had some ideas through the IARPC Terrestrial Working Group, but one thing we discussed is something that could be a collaborative between the Terrestrial group and the permafrost group that focuses on vegetation permafrost feedbacks. So that's one thing that I wanted to put out there. We'll potentially have a meeting in the spring, an IARPC meeting where we bring the two groups together and discuss that more. Okay, so the last thing I just wanted to mention is that IASC supports early career fellows. And for the Terrestrial Working Group, there are 2 excellent fellows, but they're not from the US. And so it would be nice to have some US applicants for 2018. And the deadline is coming up very soon. So if you know anyone that might be interested in this fellowship, please let them know. And you can find out info on the IASC website. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to just leave you with is a cartoon from that Frozen Ground product. This is from the Bumpy Road, and it's got this old permafrost field ecologist who is looking back to his golden days, and then it has a comic panel about what's happening now. And the thing that I like the most is the idea that not only are there more mosquitoes, but there are more female scientists in the Arctic. Okay, and that is my presentation today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Michelle. That was very nice overview. Anybody have any feedback, commentary, questions about IASC, the Terrestrial Working Group?
Yeah, I do. Michelle, this was really great. Thank you. I thought that was useful. We have the Permafrost Carbon Network. We have in past years received funding a little bit for workshop support from IASC. And I was curious, and that was usually, I think, supported by the Terrestrial Working Group. And I'm curious if this will continue or not.
Oh, I bet. Vladimir, did you?
Yes, I can answer. Yeah, that was our push. The U.S. representatives push for this funding, and well, the thing is that even if we were kind of encouraging to submit these proposals, it's still the duty and responsibility of the scientists, groups and communities to submit this. And I believe that in the next round, another proposal from Carbon Permafrost group will be, well, I think will be treated pretty favorably, because all our previous funding, they kind of return with lots of work done, and everybody liked the presentations of the results. So I think if you will prepare for the next cycle, which will start sometimes in spring, I don't remember exactly. There's two deadlines, and one in somewhere like May, maybe end of May, and another one in October. So if you prepare just using the same pretty much previous submissions, like an example, it's still the same form. Submit another one for specific funding for or meeting or some other activities. That could be pretty successful. I think we should do it. And of course now we still, I'm there for a while, and then Michelle will be there for, I hope for much longer time. So you have some advocates there for sure.
Yeah, Christina, too, it seems like, at least the one meeting that I attended, the primary focus for this funding is the involvement of early career researchers. So not only could PCN apply to have some money to bring early career people to their meeting, but also it seems like you could apply to send early career researchers that are involved in PCN to other meetings as well.
Okay, that is very useful. Okay. I like the international component of IASC, of course, and I think the PCN has tried to be very international as much as possible. And with IARPIC, it seems we are a little more, clearly we are more US focused. So I like that connection to the international community through IASC. I think that's very important. Thank you.
Actually, if I can piggyback on Christina's last comment, I have a question about organizational structure a bit. So this is Jessica Ernakovich from the University of New Hampshire. I am just recently learning about all these organizational bodies and structures. So Michelle, could you briefly, you talked a bit about it, but could you explain the hierarchy of the Arctic Research Commission, IARPC, and IASC, please, and how they fit together and when they don't? And
Oh, goodness.
or no.
They're all different, very different creatures. Yeah.
Yeah, they're different, but I think that we're making a push right now to use IARPC as the way of transmitting information from IASC back to the US community, and also for us to collect information from the US community to bring to IASC.
Okay.
So that's like the one very clear linkage that exists to me.
So this is Sarah, and I'm with the IARPC Secretariat, and it is a good question, Jessica, and it would take actually a while to explain the whole
Sorry.
structure. No, that's okay. And I'd be happy to do that offline with you, but IASC is an international organization, and the US members are delegates, which have been appointed by the National Academy of Sciences. So, and they serve, I think, 2 3-year terms. Is that right, Michelle? I'm glad.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So when there is a page on the IARPC Collaboration's website that has IASC related activities and information, and you can go there and see who all the US members are for all the US delegates are. But it is an international organization, and IARPC is legislatively mandated to coordinate US federally funded research in the Arctic, and our sister organization under the same legislation is the US Arctic Research Commission.
Okay.
They recommend priorities, and then we take those recommendations and we write a 5-year plan. And these collaboration teams, the one you're sitting and listening to now, are designed to implement that plan, as well as coordinate the US community and provide input for Michelle as a delegate to take back to IASC on US priorities, and for Michelle to come back from IASC meetings and report on what's going on in the international realm of things related to Terrestrial Working Group of IASC. So that's a very short overview. And if you want to get on the line at a later date, just send me an email and let me know.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Cool, thanks, Sarah. Maybe, yeah, maybe we could have you give a monthly webinar for us, actually.
Me?